Greetings, Green Thumb Gardening family. In this morning's video, we're going to show you guys how easy it is to propagate rose cuttings. As you guys can see, we have two cuttings here that we took from our purple climbing rose bushes out in our front yard garden extended grow area. We've already taken the liberty of removing all of the leaves and foliage from these two cuttings. What we did was we cut a 45-degree angle, as you guys can see, on the bottom of these two cuttings. We cut our cuttings flat across the top. We only left newly emerging buds on these cuttings. We won't be using rooting hormone for this propagation experiment here. What we're simply going to do at this time, Green Thumb Gardening family, is take a sharp blade here. We're going to score our cuttings along those bottom growth nodes, as we always do when we propagate anything from cuttings here at the Green Thumb Gardening family. Next up, we're going to take a bit of tissue paper, just regular household toilet tissue. We're going to take that tissue, we're going to wrap the portions of our cuttings, that bottom portion of our cutting where we scored it and trimmed it down at a 45-degree angle. We're going to wrap that portion of the cutting in tissue paper, that you guys see me doing here right now. Very, very simple and easy process and easy way to propagate rose cuttings. What we did was we left a minimum of an inch of overhang on the bottom with tissue on the bottom of our cutting, so that our cutting is completely covered along the areas where we scored it at. We're going to take our mist bottle here. We're going to go ahead and wet this tissue. And do that so that tissue stays in place. We're going to take our hand, we're going to squeeze that tissue down around our cutting. We're going to wet it again. We have two cuttings here, so we're going to go ahead and do that same thing with our next cutting. Again, we're going to score it along those growth nodes where we expect for new roots to form. Nothing fancy, nothing scientific about this process at all. We do that same thing with this particular cutting. I'm going to use that tissue and tightly wind it, wrap it around the bottom portion of our cutting, assuring that we have some overhang here at the bottom. You don't need this much tissue. I'm using a little bit more tissue than actually necessary for this process on this particular cutting. Do that same thing. Take our mist bottle, saturate our tissue, squeeze it down around our cutting to make sure that it's making good contact with our cutting. I'm gonna wet it down again. And now we're going to take you guys out to our sidewalk where we have several other cuttings that we've already prepared for this experiment. Show you what we've done. We've taken two 1-gallon containers. We filled those containers about a quarter of the way up. And as you guys can see, we've arranged our cuttings in these containers in the areas that we wish for them to grow in during this propagation experiment. What we're going to come back and do now is fill our containers up roughly a little over the halfway mark here to hold our cuttings in place and to keep the bottom of the cuttings moist during the propagation process. So we're going to do that right now. Start here in the center, stand my cutting up, and pretty much the position that I want it to remain in during the propagation process. Do that same thing with the rest of our cuttings. Try to keep them oriented in the location that we wish for them to root in during the process. Again, we're simply adding enough soil to our container to keep our tissue paper moist around the bottom portions of our cuttings during this propagation experiment. It typically takes about 14 days for rose cuttings to root using this method. Not going to really compress the soil down around our cuttings. We will be, however, slightly watering them in and placing a plastic bag of some sort over our container for the next week and a half to 2 weeks as our cuttings root. We'll do the same thing with that bucket on the other side over here. Again, this is a very simple process. Those are purple climbing roses over there. These are cuttings we took from our teacup roses here, our red teacup roses here. So during this experiment, we are attempting to propagate 2 different varieties of roses. Again, we're going to put only enough soil in this container to cover our tissue paper and keep it moist during the propagation process. This is a simple and easy method of propagating rose cuttings, or really any other type of cutting that you want to propagate. This same method works with various other varieties of plants, fruit trees, etc. Again, a very simple process here. And now what we're simply going to do is take our mist bottle and moisten the soil in these containers. Same thing on this other one over here. As you guys saw, our soil was already fairly moist as we were filling these containers. So we won't be in any way drenching this soil. The tissue paper around the base of our cuttings, we already drenched that tissue paper. So there's plenty moisture for the propagation process already in the soil and in the tissue paper. At this point, what you're going to do is take maybe 1 gallon Ziploc type containers, place over these containers. We're going to place our containers on our front porch for about 10 to 14 days, and we'll bring you guys back. For the results of our propagating rose cuttings using tissue paper experiment in about 10 to 14 days. Thanks for watching.